All right, so we're going to do Q&A, but before we begin, are there any questions or anything does anybody want to ask questions? And for those that want to ask questions, you can come on up, and there's going to be a microphone right here on the side.
And also one over there, I
and
believe, as well.
on both sides. So if you want to come ask a question, please feel free to just come up and just ask. We'll make sure that we point to either side. But let's begin. Let's start. I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, just to be honest with you, just because seeing both films back to back, there were so many things that were in the film that I have questions about, and I know you have questions about.
Yes, we do.
So let's just get into it.
She reached into the boot.
Had to get my notes out of my. All right, so my first question is, what was the inspiration behind Bug Crush, Carter? And obviously there's a juxtaposition between Bug Crush and Swallowed, and you can see different.
Yeah, Bug Crush is actually based on a short story that I read. There was an anthology of short fiction called Queer Fear, and it was all queer horror stories. And I read that short story and it was like a punch in the stomach. And it was one of those situations where like I could picture the whole thing. I was Ben in high school. I didn't get into any of that stuff, but like I knew exactly what it was like to be in that position and, sort of be scared of something that was also exciting, that was also terrifying, that was also incredibly alluring. And so it was really just the short story that I hadn't made a short film before. I was working as a photographer at the time, and when I read the short story, it was very much like, this is my first short film. Like I felt it, I saw it in a way that I hadn't before. So. That's how that happened.
You know what? He's very modest, by the way. Bug Crushed won Sundance, and that was his first film. So he won Sundance with that movie. So he never says it though, but he did.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, like it was like a weird, you guys saw it, it's a weird fucking movie, and like it's not for everybody, and I sort of figured, okay, some people are going to find it and like it, and maybe they will, maybe they won't, and to then have it end up at Sundance and like have it open so many doors for me was amazing.
Right. It's interesting. You were like, it's not for everyone, right? So as I was going out, right, to get Underdog Barbecue, I had to take a moment to go get some food because I was like, I know I'm gonna be up here, so I need to eat.
Yeah.
I had a young woman come up to me and was like, did you see the film? And I was like, I sure did see Bug Crush before. And just wanted to know why wasn't there a disclaimer of obviously sexual violence and trauma.
Yeah.
So just kind of talking about, in 2006, talking about trauma and being trauma informed, that was not really always the case, right? And now we're kind of seeing a time where you do have to talk about, give a disclaimer and talk about this might hit some people differently.
When we made it, there was a disclaimer was like, that wasn't even something that you talked about.
Right. Do you have something to say?
I just wanted to know, what made you end the story right there? Is that where the short story ended? Or did you want to leave the viewer with that like gut-wrenching feeling of watching a rape?
In the short story, they rape these. They do it to multiple kids, and they kill them. And I somehow, in the moment, felt like it was maybe slightly more optimistic if he didn't die. Like, I don't know. Like, I hate to say that that was a version of a happier ending, but I liked the idea of the film ending with like a punch to the stomach. Yeah. And, without any kind of very clear conclusion as to exactly what happened. At that point you're in Ben's head, he's fucked up on bugs, and, he doesn't even really know what's happening.
But I think now I'm going to talk about his movie because you've opened up a category here that's very heavy, and it's kind of put him on the spot. If you didn't understand what you were going to see when you read the program, then you shouldn't have come in. I mean, that's what this is. These are very true. I think, especially Bug Crush, is a very metaphorical feeling of what it's like to be a gay boy at that time. And these movies are unapologetically gay. They're not made for anybody else. If some of the stuff offends you, then that's on you. You know, he made this movie for a very specific crowd of people because we've had to, for most of our lives, carve off the edges of who we are. And, you know, I just think I applaud you for not. Now, you can put a big X out front, and, you know, your generation is very different than mine, but it's a movie.
What and I think also, like, you know, for me, growing up as a queer kid in a small town, I mean, in Bug Crush, that's my high school. That's the road that I grew up on. Like that's 100% like my teenage years.
Yeah.
And being gay in that town as a 16, 15, 17-year-old kid was terrifying. And so like to externalize that in that fear in a way that felt like artistic and creative and sort of find a way through that fear felt, you know, it was really cathartic, and it happened, you know, years later after I had left. But it was definitely a way to try to process, you know, growing up in a town like that.
Yeah, and like speaking on the reality of being queer, right, and being, you know, having to, I can relate in that sense of it being a vulnerable space.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like, you know, like another space that was really vulnerable for me growing up, there was one rest stop that had this reputation of being like a place for cruising. And I was petrified of it, and I never dared to go there. You know, but it kind of came back and swallowed. Like that's what that rest stop, where that came from. You know, was this idea of that was another space that I was terrified. You know, it was a sort of space on the edge of my queer identity that I'd never quite dared to step foot in. It was incredibly alluring, but also totally frightening. You know, and I think that's, you know, that's the fine line that I tend to like to explore, is sort of the, you know, where those two things meet.
Okay.
Question, when did the idea for Swallowed come along? Did you make Bug Crush with the idea that at some point in your career you wanted to like add, like you said, a little brother, big brother, or it just?
I mean, you know, Bug Crush was, you know, 2006, so it was so long ago. And after it won at Sundance, you know, everyone was like, well, do you want to make it into a feature? Do you want to like, and I was like, no, like it's a short film. Like it's, you know, it was meant to be a short film, and you know, then I went off and made other movies, and you know, made The Ruins and made Jamie Marx's Dead, and it was only like last year or the year before last where, you know, when I'm working on stories and scripts and stuff, I sort of will get a character, and then I'll, you know, maybe have a location, and sort of there's a lot of different things, and they sort of exist in different stories. And this one, you know, it was a combination of, you know, what 15 years later, where those bugs might be, you know, and that was just sort of a question I asked myself. Like, you know, we shot both films in Maine, and so it was very much like, okay, I wonder, like 15 years later on, like what would have happened to these bugs? But it was never intended. It was really just, you know, it also came out of me wanting to make a film that, you know, I didn't have to wait for permission, and I didn't have to get financing, and I didn't have to, you know, I didn't have to go through all the hoops that I had been through or tried to go through on other films unsuccessfully. And I was like, okay, what do I have? You know, I have, you know, a camp. That's a camp that my dad built, an off-the-grid fishing camp. You know, I've got a white Jeep. I have, you know, the idea of crossing the border with these bugs. Yeah. I have, you know, Jenna Malone's phone number. I have Mark Patton's Instagram. Yeah, you know, I can send him a DM and tell him that I wrote a script for him, you know, and it was very much in the spirit of like, what can I do on my own with a couple, with, you know, 5 or 6 friends.
At the end of Bug Crush, there's a difference between Bug Crush ending and then the Swallowed ending,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And how you wanted to give, at the end of Swallowed, a more sense of like empowerment, right?
Ben
A
has
sense
taken
of
his power
optimism.
back, yeah, for sure.
In that scene, what was the intention behind that?
In Bug Crush?
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted it to be a punch to the stomach of the audience. Like I wanted, you know, worst case scenario, you know, unfolded.
Yeah.
You know, like there was definitely, and seeing them back to back. I mean, honestly, I didn't even realize that I had named the lead character of Swallowed, Ben, until like we were shooting. Like it was not intentional, but I like the idea that, you know, this Ben in Swallowed is sort of the Ben that's become okay with himself and has
Yes.
sort of like, he has taken his power. I mean, okay, he's gonna be a porn star, you know, but he's taken his power back and he is sort of ends in the, you know, in the position of power.
Right.
You
And
know?
okay, thank you. Oh, we have a question from the audience.
We do.
Go ahead.
Ask a question, and I'll jump back on camera. First things first, thank you guys for being here. Holy shit, both of those movies were fucking awesome.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And first one, 2 questions real quick. Mark, did you write a back story for your character? Because it felt like you kind of knew, you had like sort of mapped it out inside and out. And then after that, were you trying to say anything about sort of the culture of, what's the term, chicken hawking on some level? And just sort of like...
The culture what?
Is there a culture, or were you trying to make a commentary about chicken hawking, like about sort of... about the sort of, the predator, like a little bit of a predatory nature on it on some level between the age differences.
Okay.
Thank you guys again for coming.
Thanks. Okay, I'll take it first. This movie is exactly what it is, right? This is a great depiction of the underbelly of gay life in Los Angeles and New York, for boys who run away from home and go to New York and get caught in this. Perhaps the festival should have put some warning out for a trigger warning. And that's a generational thing. This is a movie. Mm-hmm. And I think that he meant it to be exactly what it is. You know, rape is horrible. Mm-hmm. You know, throwing somebody down a shithole is horrible. But what that man did to those boys was horrible. Mm-hmm. Everybody's horrible. But this is not a morality tale. This is a movie, it's a very specific movie. And this kind of movie has allowed, we're jumping forward in culture now. When I was that boy's age and moved to New York, Ben's age and moved to New York, none of this would have been possible. None of it. You wouldn't be possible. You certainly wouldn't be possible. And to be comfortable in your world, there are people who have gone out and broke the boundaries of everything to make that happen. Now, I thought I was terrified to do this movie. He wrote this part for me. And if any of you have ever seen me in a movie, that man is not me. You know?
Thank goodness.
He saw, yeah, I mean, it's just everything. And he had seen Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, which is my documentary about bullying and homophobia. And I'm really strongly implanted in the non-bullying culture from any direction, you know. There are a million different ways to bully people. And so I almost didn't do it. I mean, I came very close. I didn't think I could do it. But I had been on the road with another film, and I talked about how I quit my career because people harassed me, right? They questioned me constantly what my intention was, and just for me being in the world, you know, telling my story. So I made a documentary, and I went out and I told that story, my story, and I didn't care what anybody thought of it. It's like, this is what happened to me, and but I would say, oh, you know, and I was a really good actor, and my career was robbed from me. And God said, okay, we'll put your money where your mouth is. And he gave me this. Because I had done like 6 or 7 movies, and they're all just whatever. And this scared the shit out of me, to be honest with you. And I just as triggered as anybody else when I was like, don't ever show these two movies together again. It's way too much, you know?
I'd kind of forgotten how dark Bug Crush was, to be honest.
But I love it and appreciate it. I'll never see it again, you know, because look at me. I think that's not me, but.
But I mean, I think also like the idea of having, you know, having a queer villain that is a real queer, you know, and having a queer villain that's like, that is a archetype that many of us in the queer community have encountered. You know, I mean, I don't know what 19, 20, 21-year-old gay boy hasn't come across a version of Rich, you know, and I liked the idea of subverting the expectation that this was just going to be like a bug monster movie, and that at a certain point you're like, oh wait, maybe I don't have to be as worried about the bugs as I do about this guy, because he comes in and everything changes, and you sort of have to reassess.
You know, yeah, and it's like there's a couple of really good reviewers pointed out that they would not want to see Rich played by a straight guy.
Right.
It would be too much of a character, but I am gay and I know those people, and therefore it's not a caricature, it's just another person I met on the street. And so, you know, if I saw a straight guy doing that, I'd be really pissed off, to be honest with you. And then they say, why don't you give it to the gay guy? And because maybe it makes it too real, you know? But I'm grateful you gave it to me, that's for sure.
I'm very happy you accepted in the end. I was able to talk you into it.
Yes, you were. And go to the woods in Maine with,
Yeah.
you know, we were in the middle of nowhere. That was like a really...
That outhouse was our bathroom.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have another question from my lovely wife, Angelica.
Hi. So, Mark, I just saw your documentary, actually, when my
Yes.
wife told me she was doing this. I'm a researcher of things, so I'm like, hell yeah, let's watch all of this. So I really liked it. I liked the documentary we watched. Carter, you said something about, you know, in this art form, you know, gay boys not being able to see themselves kind of in those spaces. So I guess my question for you as a Black queer woman is, how do you keep that eye open when you're making horror films? Because as a Black queer woman, I rarely see reflections of myself.
Yeah.
And I really did like both films. But what I do often notice in horror films, you know, outside of kind of what's happening with a couple filmmakers, is that we don't see roles for us. And the ones we do tend to be stereotypical of almost the white guys. So is there something that, or some way that you're keeping that perspective open, so as you're giving yourself a platform for gay boys, that it is inclusive to others?
I mean, I think that it's up to us to make the films, and to make the films that we want to see ourselves in, and to put ourselves in those films. You know, like it's you know, because no one else is going to do it for you. Like there's a, you know, you sort of have to, you know, I sort of, in a way, I feel like I have to fight my fight before I can fight anybody else's fight. Like, you know, and you know, as a kid growing up in, you know, in that town in Maine, you know, I wanted nothing more than to see myself in the films that I loved. And, you know, it basically took me starting to make films for that to happen, you know? And I think that that's what I would say is, you know, if you're not seeing yourself in the films that you love, you know, make a film and put yourself at the center of it. Write a character, write a script that, you know, that's you know, that tells the story that you want to see on the screen, for sure.
I relate to what you're saying, but I never got to see myself on screen. The door was not open for me, and I had to open it, you know? And I still identify, I'm a gay man, right? When I was born, there was no gay pride. It was dangerous to walk on the street. And this would be porn. And all this, we fought, you know, just as hard as anybody else is fighting to get our voice out, to speak our truth. And then that lays the foundation for the next person to come along and speak their truth. And it's like Carter said, if you don't see yourself, make a film, write a book. But it's like when people, there's that wonderful Beyonce thing that everybody's doing on TikTok now. Don't dream it, don't think about it, don't make excuses, don't put down people who are doing it, do it yourself. And if you don't like what you see, do it yourself. And I'm not saying that in an attacking way. This is just a very, I love you all, but this is a very vulnerable space right here. And you just saw 2 of his movies. And we really haven't talked about the movies as movies yet. Just a plain old movie, And so it's hard to put your stuff out there.
Yeah.
It's scary.
It is.
It's scary for me to play Rich. I mean, I look old and ugly and mean and like a faggot, But I'm like standing there in my faggoty truth and saying this is a story that should be told about how people are abused and taken advantage of and how they empower themselves to get up. Like even the porn thing, him empowering himself through porn. It's like, there's 2 ways of looking at porn. There's a couple of million different ways of looking at prostitution, You can be empowered by it or you can be a part of the slave trade.
Yeah.
That's it. But I like that we have everybody's, I want to see very specific, I want to see your specific truth. I want to see your specific truth, yours, and this is his.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Another question?
Well, first I'd like to say thank you for showing both of them back to back. I found them very powerful together. I really enjoyed both films too, and this is a bit more of a technical question, but who are you going to distribute Swallowed Through if you haven't yet? Because I didn't see it online yet, available to buy.
Yeah, it's not online yet. It's going to be coming out, I think, first quarter of next year.
Cool.
Yeah.
And are you considering putting Bug Crush on as like a bonus feature for people?
Well, Swallowed will come out like streaming, like on digital platforms.
Okay.
And then what I'd like to do is to sort of do some sort of Blu-ray package, something, physical media where you could see both of them together.
Okay.
Although I don't know if watching both of them together is in
Hellbender
one
was-
sitting is a
That's fine.
Hellbender was distributed through like Yellow Veil and Vinegar Syndrome. The website and such has like tons of things related to queer horror and stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you were planning on releasing something through them because they're great.
not through Yellow Veil. XYZ was our sales agent, and
nice.
we're still finalizing the deal points, but it'll be on streaming platforms early next year. And I will say, like, anyone who does or did like the film, like the biggest thing that you can do to help a little film like this is to go onto Letterboxd or go and write a review or give it a rating, because otherwise people just won't find it, and it's only by people actually taking the time to go and rate it and review it that like helps raise awareness and helps people that might really like it find it. So if you didn't like the film, feel free to not go on Letterboxd and rate it. But if you did, I would really appreciate it.
No, thanks for sharing that because I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know Letterboxd made an impact for the small filmmaker by that much, though. But that's good to know that.
Yeah, it makes a big difference.
And I just with Bug Crush, just the date rape quality of it. I mean, it was very powerful. It was very well done, very well shot for your first short. I just really appreciated how you told the story and how you, even though it ended. Like some people wanted maybe more, I think you ended it at the right spot. It was really well done. But thank you.
Thanks.
What do you think would have happened if he would have ended it with the boy in the river? Do you know what I mean? Like there's a couple of endings to Swallowed, I think.
Yeah.
But I personally like the credit roll. I think it like makes you a little happy as you walk out. But I think that
he's going to win a Squirty Award for best group scene. I mean,
Right,
come on.
right.
Like, well, how does it get better than that?
yeah, you hold the tension really well, don't you?
I did appreciate the river scene, though. If you asked,
Yes.
I appreciated him washing his lover and kind of saying goodbye.
Yeah.
And kind of the ritualistic quality of it that I think is just basic human nature.
Yeah, and that was something that I added. It wasn't in the original script, and I added that after sort of working on development, because I was like, I think that we need to take a break and take a breather and spend a moment with this guy that has just been through it, and and watch him wash the dirt out from his friends underneath his fingernails.
Yeah.
Like, they're just to take a breath.
May I ask a question? Were you affected by AIDS? Because I think the whole thing is a great metaphor for the 80s culture and AIDS, like giving disease to each other, bugs
Yeah.
to each other.
I mean, the story, I'm sure, I know I've talked to Scott Trelevin, who wrote the story Bug Crush that it's based on, and that was something that he was affected by.
Right.
And I think that as a kid growing up in the early 90s, I was completely petrified of sex and my sexuality, and every rash or bump or any kind of thing that meant death for me. And so being afraid of sex just felt like natural. It felt so like I've always had that
For me.
weird.
I think it's a great metaphor for the
Yeah.
whole. And then you washing him in the river and cleaning him
Yeah.
and setting him free. I think that aspect is just beautiful.
It was very beautiful. I loved watching that because it was very, like he said, ritualistic.
Yep.
I felt like it gave me like a sense of like, while also the relationship of the friend, Dom and Benjamin, before all that has transpired, they had a relationship, and it was
Yeah.
actually a very loving platonic relationship. And Dom had confessed his love in the very beginning.
Yeah.
But obviously over time we couldn't see that there could have been growth in that space.
Yeah.
And so I liked in that film, that part of the film where they were able to, he was able to kind of wash his friend and cleanse his friend. It was almost like representational of how their relationship was.
Yeah, he felt like he owed it to him. Like he wanted that,
Absolutely.
he didn't want to just leave him on the floor in Rich's
Right.
cabin. There was something.
But
A sense of
it's
closure.
pretty common for boys to have that straight love affair. Most guys at about 15 or 16 have it.
Yeah,
and it's the love that
Fall
they're not
hopelessly in
speaking to.
love with their best
Right.
friend.
You know,
I can
Story of my
relate.
life.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like,
it's a pretty common experience.
Yes.
I think.
I mean, I think it's pretty common, not just for gay boys.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I can relate.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people.
Your friend that you just can't let go of.
Yeah. We have another question from the beautiful audience.
So,
Hello,
I'm
Jerry.
curious, there was a moment, Rich made a remark, something that hinted that he had been abused in some way himself. So I'm interested to hear you say why you put that in there, what your intent was with that line that Rich had about sort of like, maybe I'm not the villain because something happened to me too, or...
You want me?
Yeah.
Okay, I chose that, and there's a whole riff that he goes on to that's not in the film about explaining that like he had accidentally killed these people, but Benjamin was doing it on purpose. So Benjamin was going to go to hell, very religiously conflicted. And the truth of the matter is that when you're playing villains or you're playing anybody, nobody thinks they're the bad guy. He doesn't think he's a bad guy. He knows he might be doing some bad things, but he used to be Ben. He used to be that beautiful boy that everybody lusted over, and then the door closes. And I think it's a lot of things that especially beautiful young people understand, that like you float through life in a certain way. The door is open for you. And then one day they don't. And you didn't know you had that power until the power's gone. You didn't know how easy it was until it was over. And so that's why I chose it. And I wanted him to, like that part where he says, I need to hear you say it. I need to hear you say that I'm not a bad person. I know people like that, and they're not as extreme as that, but they do horrible things to people. And, then they make their amends. We had a whole generation of
by
that.
By saying they're not a bad person, you mean?
Yeah, I'm not a bad person, but I just did all this horrible shit to you, and I'm going to kill you. So, it's delusional. It's delusional. He is a bad person.
Yeah. And Rich's line, I would never take advantage of you, people took advantage of me. That was 100%, that was not in the script, that was 100% Mark, and coming up with that on set, on the spot, as we were talking about, like, let's find ways to, make Rich more than,
Human.
to make sure he's human and make sure that he's not just some campy villain that like is horrific, that he's a person and he has a history and there's a reason that he is like this.
And I think it shows how delusional people are too, that through all of that, all of the things that happened, he still thought maybe he could get laid with this guy. Like literally, I said to Carter when he cast me, when we started shooting and I said I would do it, I was like, just please, because I'm vain like everybody else. I mean, the angles he shot me from are terrifying, And I'm 63 years old, and I want to look good, still. But I said, please make me fuckable, please. And I saw it, and I thought, what part of fuckable is that, I don't know. But yeah, it was an intention, Jerry, to make him human, because he's not a trope, certainly.
So, Mark, I have a question for you. You said that you are not like Rich much. How much of yourself did you put into that character? Because that was one of my personal favorites. Just being a gay man and like being out, and you come across that older gay man that you just don't fuck with, and the way you kind of just like sashayed in and you were campy and you were here, and like that you made us kind of fall for you, so we like hated that we loved you, and
Yeah. Oh yeah, thank you for saying that. Every bit of it was intentional, and every bit of it was set up, and like that's what I meant earlier about this is our story. It's not necessarily your story, or maybe any of your stories, but this is our story, and we're letting you into a world that actually exists, and you know those people. The queen that has just been around the world and now is a bitter party of 10,000 personalities. And you see them come into the room and you just want to run because sooner or later they're going to attack. Especially if they like you. If they think you're cute, they're going to go after you. And I hope I'm nothing like that, honestly. I mean, any of you who have seen Scream Queen or Nightmare on Elm Street, or any of the stuff that I see, you have seen me in. I'm the gentle boy. I'm the boy that cries. And, I'm the broken heart carrier. And I don't identify with this motherfucker at all. I would put a gun in his mouth and blow his head off. Just in a second. And the same with the guys in Bud Crushed. I would kill them on the spot. Because I don't believe in abusing people. And I know so many people who were abused, sexually abused, traded around when they were young boys in New York. And I think those people should get killed. But I also don't think you shouldn't show them. Because if you show them, then they're there. The monsters are right out. And don't ever be fooled. Don't send your kids to New York when they're 17 or 18 to be tap dancers. Don't do it. It's not a good thing. Yeah.
But I moved to New York when I was 17. You moved to New York when you were 17. We turned out okay, right?
We did.
Okay.
We're not crazy. We make movies instead.
Yeah. I know we have another question, but I wanted to ask this question. I know, Mark, you just said that you're a gentle, right? And I feel that. When you had to get to be the character in Swallowed, from what depths did you have to pull out of yourself to be in that space? For you, yeah, to be that person. Like, how did you kind of get to that part where you had to okay, camera's rolling, I have to be this person?
Well, I really wasn't going to do the movie up until the time I stepped on the set. Mm-hmm. And I had talked to Rob, the guy that was the costume designer. I was very specific with my costumes, and it was done over the internet. I mean, I had the size of the heel I wanted, and the ring I wanted, and the shirt I wanted, and the way my stomach pushes out, and I can't stand that. So, I'm like putting myself right out there as a, paunchy old man. And I still didn't think I could do it. And then the best way I can explain it, there's a big religious background to him, in my mind, this boy. He's like a Pentecostal drug dealer, crazy motherfucker, right? And there's some of that in the outcuts where he's like, he'll pray for you and then put a gun in your mouth, and empty your pocket, put a gun in your mouth. And all I can say is the acting Holy Spirit descended on me when I walked in the door, and I became him. And I never had that experience before, and I'll tell you why. Every film set that I've ever gone to, I had to worry about the lights. Did I look good? How old was I? Where was the key light? Don't act too gay, because you'll get fired if you act too gay. That's all the armor that I would come onto a film set with. This film set, I just came on as myself. And then it allowed me to have no judgment and create the monster that's up there, But that was only because I did my work and I got out of the judgment, And I did try to save myself a little by saying I'm a nice person, That was maybe a little mark. But I figure Rich has been through rehab 3 or 4 times, so he knows about making amends and shit, So.
I liked at the end you were like, "You going to hell?" That part, I was cracking up.
Yeah, it was fun. But thank you for asking that. Yeah, appreciate it.
It was the irony. Nisi?
Okay, for Mark,
Yes, ma'am.
I guess I can say I can appreciate you admitting that straight guys have platonic and love affairs. That's we knew that when the Xbox came out.
Oh,
but
yes.
thank you for admitting that. My question though for Carter. Oh yeah, and I can appreciate you saying sex is terrifying. It is petrifying. Where did you get the symptoms for like after you get bit by the bug or like when you make interaction with the bug? Where do you come up with the symptoms?
Like making the actual bug?
No, the symptoms like that you.
The symptoms. Some of that was left over from Bug Crush. The fact that it sort of paralyzed you and you couldn't move. And I liked the idea of putting Rich into the outhouse when he was paralyzed and couldn't move. It was funny to watch because the bugs in Bug Crush are real bugs, and which are giant hornworm tobacco worms. Yeah, exactly. And then the ones in Swallowed were animatronics, were bugs that we built to match that. But I kind of liked the idea that it was a head trip, it was a body trip, it was a paralyzing trip, just sort of incapacitating, something that people would pay for. And, a lot of friends of mine have tried, everything from ayahuasca to kombu, this like frog venom thing where they, burn a hole in your arm and they put frog venom in it and you trip intensely for like 90 seconds. And, to me that stuff is terrifying. But it's very real. And I liked the idea that the bugs were something that absolutely could happen in nature. I mean, I don't think that there's bugs like that exist, but it's not that far off the mark if you consider what's out there in the world.
Bug chasing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
Oh, hello. I
Hello.
just wanted to say, Mark and Carter, both of you for directing Mark. Your performance was incredible.
Thank you.
I just was loving every second of it because, even though we hate villains, it's like they're some of our favorite characters just because of how you can make just such a character out of it. But anyways, my question. You filmed it in like a 4:3, right? Aspect
Yeah.
ratio. I noticed like all the close-ups and like just keeping it like so contained. Was there any other like reason that it was in 4:3?
I chose 4:3 because I knew that I wanted to have the film happen largely in close-up.
Yeah.
And I really love the way that a face is able to fill a 4:3 frame. Like when you're shooting 69 or wider, you do a close-up and you've got like half the frame as a face, and there's inevitably going to be another half of the frame that's empty. And with a 4:3 aspect ratio, you can really fill the frame with a face. And I wanted it to feel super claustrophobic, and just so that everything was closing in on you. And I knew that for the extraction scene, I guess, if you want to call it that, I knew that I wanted to be on faces rather than other body parts. And so I felt like the faces would tell the story more than anything else, but only if you were that close up to them.
It definitely helped a lot. I could feel just the visceral reaction throughout the whole thing because of
Good.
that. But I just wanted to say it was amazing.
Thank you.
Carter, I have a question for you. So what made you choose Ben to be a porn star and Swallowed? Because, well, sex work now is like a very positive thing.
Yeah.
And I am a drag queen, but if you come to any of my shows, you see that I consider it sex work. I use my body, my sexuality to trap people in and give me money. So like, what made you do that? Because I found it very empowering to see somebody else in sex work using their body to get what they want, and
Yeah.
it ended up being a positive thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of like the prostitute, the stripper, the drag queen being the kind of throwaway character,
Yep.
like he ended up winning in the end.
Yeah, and I love the idea that he is able to have that power and to use that power to kind of win the day, I guess. And I liked the idea that he wasn't ashamed of it. Like he 100% was comfortable and didn't have the hang-ups that most people maybe have around sex work. And that it actually comes in handy. That's what, in the end kind of, enables him to manipulate Rich in the way that he does, is because he knows how to use his sexuality and his power, in a way that he's not ashamed of. And I like the idea also that it was like, Ben from Bug Crush, they're not the same character, but like, this is also a guy that's 100% unapologetic. Like Rich is unapologetic. Ben is he's not ashamed of being gay. He's not ashamed of anything that he's doing.
Have you think the 15 years between those two movies, which I think is a really significant amount of time, a significant period of time, is like now, when I was that age, if somebody took a picture of you naked, it was the end of your career, right? That was it, you were done. Or if somebody said you were gay, you were out of the room. Now you can have an OnlyFans account and support yourself like walking around your house naked, and it's not thought of in the same way. I mean, it's literally like, it's just a medium to get to the next place. And there are a lot of straight guys on OnlyFans things. And they take requests, and they're just happy to do whatever you're going to do if you pay them. And they're not embarrassed by it. And it's like, you won't be able to shame them. It's the same with the drag culture. It's like, you don't have to go home with your head hung in shame.
We don't have to listen to other people's definitions of what is shameful or what we should feel self-conscious of. If you feel self-conscious about something you're doing, like that's, I think it's better, that's up to you to not listen to the people that are making judgments. And if you're okay with what you're doing, and then good for you and go for it. And that's kind of how I saw Ben.
But it's a powerful stance too. Do you know what I mean? Like for Ben to, he was happy. He won the awards, and it all worked out for him. If he would have been a little less activated in that direction, he would have been dead. Because he would have never made it out of the room.
Yeah.
With that man.
Question from Tammy?
So something that Mark has sort of skirted around that has always been, if you did intentionally or not, when watching the films, one of the things that really stuck out to me, and one of the earliest things that I encountered that really horrified me about like being queer in gay culture, was the subgroup of people who fetishize the idea of like giving away HIV infections or like deliberate bug chasing. And then also people who are like pause for neg, or who want to deliberately stealth somebody else into contracting HIV. And I think that's something that like the movie implies, because both of them are sort of using this like bug as a drug or something that is desirable. And although the characters that we're seeing are being forced into these situations, it's implied that there has to be like a group of people out there who are looking to obtain these bugs for the purpose of like pleasure.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know if there was like a deliberate relationship between like you as a filmmaker, like sort of creating that space and like that narrative.
I think that it's probably easier for me to think about the relationship, in hindsight than something that I was thinking about when I was, was working on making the films. I think that part of I've sort of been linked to Bug Crush because that was my short film, and even though I didn't write the short story that it's based on, that was very much something that it was set in that story that this drug is both incredibly intoxicating and horrifying, and more than any kind of statement on bug chasing or any kind of that. It was more about that mix of what is intoxicating and what is repulsive, and how those two things can kind of live hand in hand in a way that is kind of unexpected and puts us in this uncomfortable place that we're not quite sure how we want to react, how we should feel, and I kind of like asking those questions and sort of, for myself and for other people, just, that the situation where you want to look at something and you want to look away, but then you want to look back, and, I think that there is, it's called bug chasing, and I think that that is something that, can be drawn from the film, but it was less something that I was thinking about when I was actually writing it. I was probably thinking more about the love story, about the idea of this friendship, and the Rich's character, and sort of how the gay dynamic worked for those guys.
May I? Because I think that Carter made a movie, like a very, very specifically, let's go to Bug Crush, all right? The culture that he was living in at that time as a young man, he made an AIDS allegory, and he didn't even know he was doing it, because the young people wanted to have sex, and the drive to have sex couldn't be stopped. The testosterone overrides everything, and you put yourself into an ugly situation, and then somebody gives you the bug, and then you're it. And that's the way it really was. Like, for people who were insecure, every time you went to bed with somebody in the 1980s, if you were a gay man, there was a good possibility on the other side you'd come out infected by the bug, And so that made sex terrifying, which leads you to these boys brutalizing this other boy, raping him, where, S&M culture became very big in the 1980s because you didn't have to have sex with each other. You could just play these games where no physical contact took place, or act out rapes and stuff like that. I think you've made a wonderful AIDS metaphor.
But
if I were a critic, I'd write it.
I think that when I read that short story, I saw it as a horror film, and it petrified me, it scared me, and I saw it and I felt it, and I think that the reason that I responded to it so much, without even really understanding it at the time, is because I'd spent so long growing up afraid of sex, and afraid of catching something, and afraid of the bug. And I think that, I didn't really put it all together until, we were already in production and even afterwards. But I think that's part of why it was, such a visceral reaction when I read the short story, and what made me decide to make it my first short.
May I ask you a question? What did you think?
I think that it probably leans more into what you were saying. I feel like if you didn't do it deliberately with the intention of making that the devastation that AIDS and HIV has caused to the gay community has left a sort of permanent zeitgeist.
Yeah.
That whether you intend to be or not, whether you get it or you don't, or you know anybody, that there is always going to be just what the word zeitgeist means, like a cultural spirit. There's always going to be that background spooky haunting us. And in order to avoid that again, I guess, in the future. But we see I think that those kinds of things sort of work out in a good way on accident, if that makes sense. That whether you intended it to or not, that because of gay culture and how much it's been impacted by HIV/AIDS, that it's always going to be, like people are always going to draw those parallels regardless of whether you mean to or you don't.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I think that people work their fears out, you know, in different ways. And like if, you know, I work mine out through films and scripts and, you know, and kind of address things that I'm afraid of in, you know, in the stories that I like to tell because it's maybe in some ways easier than, you know, going to therapy.
Thank you. Thank you. And you look fab, by the way. You better go off, okay? So we have about a couple more minutes left before we are ending, but I just want to say I'm very honored to sit on this stage with the both of you, and Mark, especially you. You have paved the way for us, the first male Scream Queen. You really, and like you talked about earlier, how you lived a life before us, and now we're able to sit on the stage free, right? And being free. And I really, really appreciate your vulnerability, and I know when I watched Scream Queens, that I felt more connected to you. Watching that, and it's just a real disclaimer, not disclaimer, but I wanted to put in that I know that you are now living in Puerto Vallarta.
I actually live in Mexico City.
You're in Mexico City now? Okay. And
yeah, I've been out of the country for 16 years.
Yeah, so you've been there for you said how many years now?
16.
Yeah, okay. So in the movie, in Swallowed, you mentioned Puerto Vallarta being there, and I'm like, I was literally just there not too long ago.
I wrote that because I was.
Put that in after he saw
they were so like because I wrote this for him after seeing Scream Queen. Like
and there are a lot of riches in Puerto Vallarta.
Yeah.
I mean that type of like Midwestern gold chain dude who has retired from being whatever. But yeah, there's a huge culture in Puerto Vallarta, which is one of the reasons I left. Is there's a big alcohol drug problem there, of course, and there's a lot of prostitution, and you know the most beautiful boys come from all over Mexico to be in Puerto Vallarta to sell themselves because that's the only way to make money, and I just couldn't live in that environment at all. I mean, it was too much for me. And I was married at the time to a Mexican national, and we moved to the farm. We lived on a farm in Celaya, Guanajuato, which is central Mexico. And I've been in Mexico City now for quite a while, and I love it. I just like, if there are any like people who love New York and wanted to live in New York in the 80s, go to Mexico City. Yeah, it's exactly that. It's inexpensive, it's vibrant, it's really nice.
I'll say too, just quickly about Nightmare on Elm Street too, because like as a kid growing up and loving horror movies, you know, seeing Jesse Walsh in Nightmare 2 was the first time that I ever felt like I saw anyone that looked like me, and or you know, there was such a, and I didn't understand it at the time. You know, it didn't really make sense to me, but I knew that there was something about him that I had in common with him. And the way that Mark played Jesse, you know, he was confident and he was, you know, he was everything that I wanted to be and I couldn't be in that town. Like the way that he wore his hair and the way that he wore that shirt, like that was my dream. And I wasn't brave enough to, you know, to do that at my high school. Yeah. But I knew that we had something in common. And it just meant so much to see a little bit of myself in one of the movies that I loved.
Yeah. And it's inches, you know what I mean? Because when I saw myself on a big screen for the first time in Nightmare on Elm Street, and I was carrying a movie and, you know, my dreams were coming through, the first thing I thought when the camera ended is like, I heard faggot, you look like a big faggot, and your career's over. You'll never be a leading man because everybody knows. And then I went away. I surrendered to that, and then I came back, you know. And now I'm happy to be. I think he's beautiful. I think Jesse's beautiful. I love them all. But I grew up, you know what I mean? And I knew that I could sit in my room and stew to the end of time, and I had many successful careers, and I could say, you know, but I could have been the one that like went all the way. I wanted to be the first gay movie star, and gay movie star, and I quit, and I had to own that. And then I went back and took it all back. And now I took that ugly trope and I turned it into a platform to stand on and talk to people about being empowered, you know? But I had to do it for myself, like we were talking about before. I had to do it for me. I couldn't do it for you. Like I remember when and this is all kind of heavy and then I'll go away and won't talk about it anymore. Like, you know, gay white men built the ghetto, Greenwich Village, or West Hollywood. We built the guild. There was no place to go. And we built this, but then all of a sudden liberation came and people came into our ghetto and told us to get out. That we were just white men, privileged white men, but they didn't know the stones that were thrown at us, the self-hate that was bred into us from the time we were boys. And so I'm all for protecting my space too. I honor yours, but I'm not giving up my seat at the table for anyone because I had to fight for it way too hard, you know? To be able to sit here and say, yeah, I'm a gay man and I love it and I'm making gay films and, you know, you can't bump up against me and knock me down. I'm way too strong for that now. So that's a blessing.
Period. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Well, that's it, y'all. That's it.
Thank you
y'all
so much.
And you both look beautiful, by the way.
Yes,
thank you.
Love those boots. I mean, it's amazing.
I do
Dripping
that.
bloody mouth.
I know.